Jose, it is a tremendous chos with all of you today. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tulsa B'Shpacha B'Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Habadin Lotova, Stephen and Wendy Drazen, in honor of their parents, Israel Drazen, Dina Drazen, Eileen Rosenzweig, in memory of Stanley Rosenzweig, Zichron Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, David and Wendy Hefter, as well as Dr. Ed and Faith Wolf, the commission of the art site of Dr. Wolf's father, Cyrus Wolf, Shalom ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of their father, Ben Adler, Achaver, Baruch Mordechai, Ben Morenu, Rav Nosson, Zichron Livracha. We hope them with the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, those who need a refuah Shabbat, get the Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu Shalem Eretz Hashem, bring home our hostages, b'shalom and b'karov, and our holy soldiers should be successful. B'chol ma'aseh yedeihem. We have the great zechus today, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin a new parak, the fifth parak of Maseches Avoda Zara, Daf Samech Beis 62, and let us begin. Asocher Asapol, a really fascinating sugya. Asocher Asapol, Lasos Imo Beyayin Nesach. See, here's the interesting case over here. An Akum hires a Jew to help him with Yayin Nesach. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. First Rashi in the Mishnah, Asocher, Obed Kochavim Shesachar Es Yisrael, Lasos Imo Malacha Beyayin Nesach. So again, the interesting case over here is, so an Akum hires a Jew, and again, in this case, see, up until now, so much of our focus has been really on trying to figure out, is something Yayin Nesach, is it not Yayin Nesach? So now it's a little bit different. Here, we know that we're dealing with Yayin Nesach. That's not the Shaila. So the Akum hires the Jew to help him with his Yayin Nesach, meaning what? He says, Lahariko mikli al kli, o lahavir chavios mi makom lamakom. So for example, the Akum hires me to go out and, let's say, pour wine from one utensil to another, or to move barrels of Yayin Nesach from one location to another. And as Rashi points out, Ubiyayin Nesach mamish ka'amar. We're literally talking about real Yayin Nesach. Like, this is not Safek. Actual Yayin Nesach, shenisnasech la'avodas kochavim, ustam Yayin mabayir. Good, fine. So this is the case. So therefore, Akum hires me to go and help him with his Yayin Nesach, to pour Yayin Nesach, let's say, from barrels into bottles, or to move barrels from one location to another location. So I'm actively doing work for the Akum with Yayin Nesach. What's that? Locha schara aser. Ultimately, again, the wages that I earn from that work are aser. Okay, case one. We'll discuss why. Sachra lasos imo malacha acheres. What happens if the Akum hired me to do something else? He hired me for stam labor. Right? He hired me to help out. And what happens? So the Gemara says, now if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Sachra lasos imo malacha acheres. Last of the wide lines on top. Kol schara mut ajiv. Let's, before we get to that, let's read it inside. Sachra lasos imo malacha acheres. The Akum hired me to do a different malacha. But if the Akum hired me to do other work, mow his lawn, clean out his garage, and when I'm working, he says, by the way, can you help me move the Yayin Nesach from this location to the other location? Or can you help me just pour this off? Then what's the halacha? Mutter. The wages are mutter. Rashi, schar lasos imo malacha acheres, kol schara mutter. The afagav the agra yoev lo mishum malacha acheres he. I'm sorry. The yoev lo mishum malacha acheres he. So we'll see. The Rashi explains. The Gemara is going to explain this. So therefore, two very different cases. In case number one, I'm explicitly being hired to help with Yayin Nesach. In that case, the Mishnah rules, Tanakama rules that alocha l'maisa, the wages are aser. Case number two, I'm being hired for something else. But then once I'm working for the Akum with this something else, he asks me to help out with the Yayin Nesach. In that case, wages mutter. Wages mutter. Good. Next. So this seems to be a duplicative case. We'll discuss this. So let's say again, I happen to have a donkey, and the Akum hires me as a donkey driver to transport Yayin Nesach from one location to another location. What's the halacha? The wages are aser. What happens if he just hired me just to transport him? In other words, he didn't hire me for Yayin Nesach, he hired me to transport him from one location to another. Even let's say the Ovid Kocham is bringing, legino literally means like a flask. He's bringing a bottle of wine, a barrel of wine with him. who doesn't travel with a barrel of wine. See, he's going in, he's bringing his wine with him. Ultimately, schara mutter. Then the wages are mutter. So again, it seems to be the same principle at play in both of these cases, right? The common denominator over here is in both of these cases, if I, the Jew, am explicitly hired to work with yayin nesach, the wages will be aser. If I'm hired for some permitted purpose and just along the way I have to deal with some yayin nesach, then ultimately, again, the wages are mutter. Incredible. Mazel tov, first Mishnah of the new parak. My time is charasim. As Gemara gets right into it. Why are the wages aser? Ilema hoil v'yayin nesach aser ba'ana scharo nami aser. Okay, so maybe it's like this. Yayin nesach we know is aser ba'ana. Now again, I want to point out, even though up until now we've been using kind of like yayin nesach and stam yainam interchangeably, here yayin nesach literally means libationalized wine, right? We know for sure the wine has been used for avodah zara, so there's no shaila about that. So now we're saying that even the wages that I earn through dealing with that, again, I didn't produce it, I didn't make it, I'm moving it from point A to point B, or I'm pouring it from one utensil to another utensil. The halacha is the wages are going to be aser. The Gemara says why? If it's because yayin nesach itself is aser ba'ana, I can't get benefit from it, and therefore the wages are aser ba'ana, here's the problem. That model doesn't hold up. Why? Hari arla. We'll say, what's arla? Arla, remember again, is fruit that grows in the first 3 years of a new plant, of a new tree. The fruit is prohibited from benefits for the first 3 years. Or klaya karim. Klaya karim are forbidden mixtures. The paradigmatic example is, let's say, again, you plant grapevines and wheat in too close of a proximity to each other. Resulting growth is aser ba'ana. In both of these cases, arla and klaya karim, that's aser ba'ana. Aser ba'ana. Yeah, what's that? Tanan. Machran v'kidish bidmein mekudashas. Yet if someone took arla or someone took klaya karim and they sold it, and then let's say Reuven sold it, and now Reuven took the proceeds and he was mekadesh Rachel, the kiddushin works. What do you see from here? You see from here that proceeds from something that is forbidden for benefit, ultimately are permitted, right? In other words, the proceeds from something that is aser ba'ana are mutter ba'ana, can be used. So again, arla is aser ba'ana, klaya karim is aser ba'ana, but if Reuven takes it and he sells it, and he uses those proceeds to be mekadesh Rachel, the kiddushin works. So the problem is, this goes against what we just said. We were suggesting that maybe the reason why the wages from moving yayin nesach or from dealing with yayin nesach are going to be aser is because just like yayin nesach is aser ba'ana, so to the wages are aser ba'ana. But we see that model doesn't work. Ela hoil v'tofes es damav ke'avodas kochavim. So maybe this is actually different. This case is different over here. Why? Because avodah zara, the way avodah zara is because of the severity of avodah zara. So even that which you sell, right? If you sell avodah zara, and let's say a person has an idol, I sell the idol for $100. That $100 takes on the same severity as the idolatry itself. That's what it's called, tofes es damav. Look at Rashi. Elahoil v'tofes es damav kavodas kavim chayvan. Because remember, since we're talking about libationalized wine, it was already wine that was used for avodah zara. So therefore, what? Again, this is like an idol. The wine itself becomes like an idol. And remember, the halacha is that even if you sell an idol, the proceeds of that sale have the same status of the avodah zara itself. Kol she'ata mehayeh hemenu harihu kamahu v'chihechi didamav asur and schar pulas and navi asur. So maybe the logic is like this, that essentially the same way that if you sell avodah zara, the money is vested with the same avodah zara prohibition, so too wages that you earn through working with avodah zara take on that same avodah zara prohibition as well. And that's why again in the Mishnah, if I'm hired to, let's say, move or to pour yayin nesach, the wages will be also because the wages take on the identity of the avodah zara itself. Also interesting to note how the Gemara's understanding that once wine has been used for libational avodah zara purposes, the wine itself becomes avodah zara. Interesting. The wine itself becomes exactly like the idol. Okay, the Gemara says, here's the problem. Hari shvius. What about shmita? What about shmita produce? The tofes es dameh, because remember again, the halacha by shmita produce is same idea. Shmita produce, remember again, is prohibited. Now again, when we say it's prohibited, you're allowed to eat it, you're allowed to utilize it. You can't do commerce with it or other things like that. And if you end up doing business with shmita produce, the proceeds of that transaction become prohibited like the produce itself. The Gemara Savari Shvius, the tofes es dameh. Tanan, we learned Homer the Poel, this is actually an interesting case. I say to a worker, Helach dinar zeh, lokut li bo yarak hayom. If I say to a worker, now this is during the Shemitah year, I say to the worker, Helach dinar zeh, take this dinar is an amount of money, lokut li bo yarak. And with this dinar that I'm giving you, pick for me vegetables. So in other words, I'm going ahead now, I'm paying him a dinar to pick for me these vegetables of the Shemitah year. What's the halacha? Schara aser. The wages are going to be aser. Now this actually is going to come down to a very interesting nuance. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Lakut li bo, lashon mechahu demashma lakut li shavyav yarek. Now what this really hinges on over here is this word bo. I go over to Ruvain, during Shemitah I say, Ruvain, take this dinar, and with this dinar, pick for me this Shemitah produce. So the fact that I'm using the lashon of bo with this dinar, Rashi understands, the Gemara understands to mean that essentially there's a transaction that's happening. It's like a sale. In other words, I'm going to give you the dinar, and you give me the produce. Now again, I will say, now at that point, then I'm doing a transaction. I'm doing commerce with Shemitah produce, and then ultimately, again, the proceeds, the dinar, are going to be prohibited as well. On the other hand, lokut li yarak hayom schara mutter. But if I just say to him, lokut li yarak, just do me a favor, pick for me a vegetable. And again, there's no mention of bo, right? That almost like that sale piece is removed from it. So really it's just wages. Look at Rashi, lokot li yarak, lashon schirasu. It's really just, that's a lashon of hiring, right? That's just a lashon of wages. V'lo lashon mechar, ve'ein lo damim shiit v'su b'kedusha shvius. So the point here is, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, that wages of Shemitah, or I should say wages that concern Shemitah produce, do not take on Shemitah prohibition. It's only when the wages are structured like a sale that the wages take on the prohibited nature. But if it's not structured as a sale, it's just structured as straight wages, we see wages don't take on the severity of the prohibited item. So the Gemara says, so now that kind of blows a hole in what we just suggested was the theme of the Mishnah. Am Rabbi Avam, Rabbi Yochanan, knasu, shekansu chacham bechamar Rabbi Yayin esach. So it comes on, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he says differently. He says, no, it's knas. It's a knas. We'll say, so obviously, this changes. Rabbi Yochanan says, stop looking for the logic. It's not logic, it's a penalty. It's a penalty that the rabbis levied by chamarin, which means donkey drivers, and with yayin nesach. Now, again, the Gemara says, yayin nesach hadamra. So therefore, but it turns out like this. It's a penalty. Chazal, we've seen already, again, many different ways in which Chazal did not want a Jew getting anywhere near yayin nesach. So another way of preventing us getting near yayin nesach is how? It tells me that even if, again, the wine is already libationalized, it's already Avoda Zara, I'm not doing anything with it. I'm not drinking it, I'm not consuming it, I'm not getting benefit from it. I'm just literally being hired by the akum to transport it, to pour it. Even then, Chazal said, if you did that, you can't get benefit from your wages. Your wages are asr like Avoda Zara. What's the logic? Knas, penalty. The Gemara says chamarin mahi, but what's the case of chamarin? Well, you're throwing in here donkey drivers. What's the case of donkey drivers? The sanyo hachamarin shahayu osin malacha bepeiros shvius. Very interesting case over here. That if you have donkey drivers who are doing malacha, who are engaging in commerce with Shemitah produce, so scharan shvius, their wages are treated like Shemitah. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? My scharan shvius. What does that mean? Their wages are like Shemitah. Say if it means that they could get paid from Shemitah produce, that can't be. Then it turns out that someone is paying their debt, right, the money that they owe to the workers from Shemitah produce. When the Torah says you can use Shemitah produce, what can you use it for? Li'achla v'lo lischora. You could use Shemitah produce dafka for consumption, but you may not use Shemitah produce for business. Ve'ela the Kaddish Scharan Bikdushas Shvius. Rather, what it means ultimately is that what? Is that halacha l'maisa, see, there's a penalty here, and that we treat their wages like it has the sanctity of Shemitah produce itself. So that's why when Rabbi Yochanan says it's a knas, and the Chazal levy two knasos over here, two penalty payments, two penalties. one by Yayin Nesech and one by the donkey drivers. By Yayin Nesech is what we said, that if you're hired to do work with the Yayin Nesech, those wages are going to be usher like the Yayin Nesech itself. By donkey drivers, if a donkey driver was hired to go ahead and do work with Shemitah produce, ultimately, again, the knas, the penalty for doing, and that's illegal. You can't do commerce with Shemitah produce. The penalty for that is that their wages, ultimately, again, are treated with the same level of severity as Shemitah produce itself. The Gemara says, 1 second. Umi Kaddish, is that true? Is that true that if a donkey driver does commerce, if he's hired, the case over here is he was hired to do work with Shemitah produce. Is that true that his proceeds have the same prohibition as Shemitah produce itself? Tanya, we learned Ha'omer lepoel helech dinar zeh v'lakut liyarek hayom scharo mutter. But we just said before, this is a repetition of the case we said before, that if I hire a worker and I say to the worker, take this dinar, and go ahead and pick for me vegetables. What's the halacha? The wage is mutter, right? Because again, as opposed to lakot li yerek bo hayom schar, this is exactly what we said before. In that lashon of lakot li yerek bo, if I say take this dinar and with this dinar pick for me Shemitah produce, that has the appearance of a sale, right? I'm giving you money, you're going to give me the Shemitah produce. As opposed to the previous case where that bo, right, with it, that word is removed, then it's just simply a hiring of a worker. What you see from here is that clearly if you hire a worker to work with Shemitah produce, right, even though, again, I'm not supposed to do it, but the wages are not illegal. That just contradicts what we just said before. The Gemara says, no. So what's the case of Chamarin? The case of the donkey drivers must be like this. I hired a donkey driver to go out and do work with Shemitah produce, and I'm paying him from Shemitah produce. I think Gemara says, but 1 second. But we just say you're not allowed to do that. You can't pay someone with Shemitah produce. That is illegal use of Shemitah produce. How could that even occur? To which the Gemara answers, this is very interesting, where I pay him, but I pay him in a permitted way. Now, saying, how does that work? Look at Rashi. Tzad heter, matnas chinam. Interesting. I give him Shemitah produce. It's as payment, but I'm not giving it as payment. Instead, I'm giving it ultimately, again, as just a free gift. A free gift. What's the case? Kidisnan, as we learned. Lo yomar adam lechavero. A person should not say to his friend. Nebo said, interestingly enough, for switching gears, Rashi points out, this is Meiser Sheni. Right? Remember again, Meiser Sheni, one of the tithes that the owner of the produce has to remove. You could keep it, and you could eat it. Only catch is you have to eat it in Yerushalayim, or if the produce is too much to transport to Yerushalayim, you have to redeem it onto money. That money is now vested with Meiser Sheni sanctity, and bring it to Yerushalayim. So therefore the Gemara says, Lo yomar adam lechavero. A person should not say to his friend, I will say Samech Beis Amud Beis 62b. Heli li peros halolu Yerushalayim lechalik. This is interesting. A person should not say to his friend, take from me this Meiser Sheni produce, Yerushalayim, and we'll split it. Now what does this mean? Rashi says lechalik. First Rashi on Samech Beis Amud Beis. Shetitol sham chelik bohem. The aser lefroa chovo mi Meiser Sheni. The afagav shegam zeh ochlo b'Yerushalayim. This is interesting. I have a lot of Meiser Sheni produce, Baruch Hashem. I don't want to schlep it. So I say to Ruvain, you do me a favor. You transport my Meiser Sheni produce to Yerushalayim, and I'll split it with you. So clearly, what am I doing? I'm paying him to transport my Meiser Sheni produce, and I'm paying him to do it with Meiser Sheni, right? Fine. So you're not allowed to do that. Aval, what can I say? Ha'aval omer lo, ha'alam lo'ochlam v'lishtosam b'Yerushalayim. But what can I do? I can say, Ruvain, do me a favor and bring my Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim. And if you notice in this case over here, I make no mention about a fee, right? In case number 1, I say to him, take my Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim, and we'll split it. So that's where it's problematic, because clearly I'm stipulating with him a wage based on Meiser Sheni. In case 2, all I'm saying to him is, Aval amar lo helam lo ochlam v'lishos Yerushalayim. Do me a favor, bring it up so that we can eat it and drink it in Yerushalayim. Ultimately, again, there's no discussion about how much I'm giving you. I'm just saying we'll eat it together. V'nosnam zeh lo zeh matana shalchinam. So again, halacha l'maisa, again, he could go ahead and give it ultimately as a matnas chinam. Ultimately, again, as a free gift. So therefore, also what the Gemara is suggesting over here is it could be the same thing that you do by chamarin. If I hire someone to go ahead and do something with Shemitah produce, so again, halacha l'maaseh, I can't pay him with Shemitah produce, but what can I do? Make no mention of payment and just give him a free gift of Shemitah produce. After all, Shemitah produce is hefker. I could pick it up and I could give it to whoever I want. So l'maaseh, again, that would be permitted apparently. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amarava says no. The olam the kaddish b'kedusha shvius. So the Gemara says, in reality, we're talking about a case ultimately again where halacha l'maaseh has Shemitah sanctity. But one second. We said before, here's the problem we were getting into. The problem we were saying is that the wages earned from Yayin Nesach ultimately take on Yayin Nesach identity. But we don't see that same thing playing forward in other areas. Like by Shemitah, even if I went ahead and hired someone to do business with Shemitah produce, ultimately, again, the wages do not attain Shemitah sanctity. So comes along Rava says, and I'll explain to you the difference. Poel de lo nafish agre lo kansu rabbanon. Chamorin de nafish agrayu kansu rabbanon behu. So this is very interesting. Rava says like this. In general, a laborer is not getting paid a lot of money. So although ideally we do not want a laborer working with Shemitah produce, if he does it and he gets paid, we don't penalize him by prohibiting his wages. Donkey drivers get paid a lot more money. That's where Chazal chose to step in and to penalize where there's a lot more money on the line. The Gemara says, and by Masnisin, Chumra Diyayin Esach Shaini. Our Mishnah, which penalizes everyone, right? Because if you notice, there's a very interesting distinction over here, right? On one hand, and this really brings everything together very beautifully. On one hand, when it comes to Shemitah, if I hire a laborer and he does work for Shemitah produce, and I pay him, the wages are mutter, right? The wages are mutter, which is quite fascinating. On the other hand, if I hire a donkey driver and pay him for dealing with Shemitah produce, the wages are usser. Why that distinction? So on a very basic level, Rava says all of this is knas, because in reality, wages do not take on the prohibited status or identity of the item that you are working with. This is all knas, all rabbinic penalty. When it comes to Shemitah, the rabbis penalized ultimately again the donkey drivers because they earn a lot of money, and therefore we want to dissuade those practices. A laborer earns relatively little, and therefore we don't penalize him. When it comes to Yayin Nesach, which is our Mishnah, Masnisin Chumra de Yayin Nesach Shaini. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says Masnisin, second line down from the top. Rashi says Masnisin de Yayin Nesach de Konis Nami Poel de lo Nafish Agri Chumra de Yayin Nesach Shaini. When it comes to Yayin Nesach, because it's Avoda Zara, essentially the rabbis penalized everyone. So whether you are a donkey driver transporting Yayin Nesach, which was the second case in Mishnah, or you are a laborer, which is the first case in Mishnah, either way, ultimately, again, you are getting penalized for your involvement with Yayin Nesach. Incredible. So therefore, this concludes the first segment of this discussion. So now what it turns out over here, just to kind of bring it back, because we had like a lot of stuff over here with Shemitah and with Ma'aser Sheni, but really just to focus on Yayin Nesach. If I am hired to do work with Yayin Nesach, even though technically speaking, those wages should be permitted, because based on what we see again from Ma'aser Sheni, based on what we see ultimately again from Shemitah, there's a way to allow the wages. The severity of Yayin Nesach, being that it is Avoda Zara, forced Chazal, or Chazal felt compelled to impose a knas, and therefore your wages will be usser. And whatever level of wages you're earning, whether you're earning a little as a laborer or a lot as a donkey driver, either way, you're going to be penalized, and the wages have the status of Yayin Nesach itself. Now, of course, there's the second part of the Mishnah, which you haven't dealt with yet, which is if I'm hired not to deal with Yayin Nesach, I'm hired to deal with other stuff, and I just happen to do some Yayin Nesach work, that's going to be fine. We're focusing really on this first case over here. It's a din in rabbinic penalty, a din in knas. Incredible. Now the Gemara asks an interesting follow-up question. So we'll say, so this is very interesting. What happens if halacha l'maisa, the akum hires me, but not to deal with Yayin Nesach, to deal with what's called stam yenam. So again, remember, we've seen this distinction, although in many of our sugyas, we've kind of ignored this distinction, but there is a very big difference. Yayin Nesach is literally wine that was used for Avoda Zara, libational purposes. Ultimately, stam yenam means just the wine of an akum. The wine of an akum. Again, nothing libational has occurred with it. And remember, not every single barrel of wine that an akum has ultimately is going to be used for libational purposes. He's going to use it for himself also. So that's called stam yenam. So our Mishnah is very specific, that it's talking about a case of an akum who hired me, a Jew, to go ahead and work with yayin nesach, transport it, pour it from one barrel to another. That's very simply our case. Now, what happens if the akum hires me just to go ahead and work with his wine? His wine. So I have no knowledge that it's libationalized, no knowledge it's Avoda Zara, stam yinam, the regular wine of an akum. What's the halacha? Mao. Mi amrinon kevan di isura chamer ki yayin nesach schar nami aser. So on one hand, in halacha, if you notice, and it's clearly been seen, we really don't make a distinction between yayin nesach and stam yenam, right? In pretty much we treat them the same. So since from a prohibition perspective, stam yenam, which means just the regular wine of an akum, is pretty much treated the same way as yayin nesach, so therefore for this halacha should be the same as well. And therefore again, even if I'm hired just to work with the stam yayin of an akum, the wages should be aser. No different had he hired me to work with the yayin nesach. That's on one hand. O dilma, hol v'tum aso kil, af scharo nami kil. So we'll say this is very interesting. On the other hand, we can say as follows. There is a major distinction between yayin nesach and stam yenam, right? Yayin nesach, real Avoda Zara, libationalized wine. Stam yenam, the regular wine of an akum. There's a big distinction in the realm of tuma. This is fascinating. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, the tuma kill. Rashi says, Kidarminon be'in ma'amidin. We saw this already before. Shalosh yenos hein, yayin nesach aser bano, umetame tuma chamura bekizayis. So yayin nesach, ultimately, I will say, essentially, is treated like a corpse. Like Avoda Zara has, this in general, Avoda Zara has tumas meis, corpse impurity, and therefore again, halacha l'maisa. Again, not only is it aser ba'ano, but it's metame tuma chamura bekizayis. If there's a kizayis of it, ultimately again it conveys corpse tuma. Okay, stam yenam aser ba'ano o metame tumas mashkin b'revius. But stam yenam, interestingly enough, ultimately again has a lower level of tumah. We call tumas mashkin, like a ritually impure liquid. And furthermore, again, only conveys tumah if it has the shear of a revius. So what I say here, this is very interesting. So in certain respects, stam yenam is just like yayin nesach. How so? Just like yayin nesach is aser ba'ana, stam yenam is aser ba'ana. On the other hand, stam yenam and yayin nesach are very different. Yayin nesach essentially has the tumah of a mace, of a corpse, whereas stam yenam has tumas mashkin, liquid tumah, which is a much lower level of tumah. So therefore again, when it comes to this knas about wages, dealing with the wine of an akum, do we treat wages earned from stam yenam the same way about wages from yayin nesach? That's the shaila. Good shaila. So Tashma, let's analyze Tashma. Do gavra da agar arbe listam yenam. It's an interesting case. I had a boat. A Jew had a boat, right? And I rented out my boat to transport stam yenam. So right, I have a boat, and Akum went ahead and hired my boat, and he used my boat to transport his wine. So we'll say, so what happened? So actually, we'll keep this easy. Ruvain had a boat, right? Ruvain rented his boat out to the Akum, and Akum used the boat to transport the Akum's stam yayin. Okay. So what happened? The Akum paid Ruvain, the Jew, the owner of the boat, he paid him his fee, his wage in wheat. He was paid in wheat. Fine. So Ruvain comes before Rav Chisda. So he has to now, obviously after the fact, Ruvain realized, there might be a shiloh over here. So he comes before Rav Chisda. What do I do with the wages? Amrle zil kalinu v'kabrinu. The Rav Chisda said, burn the wheat and bury it. Burn it and bury it. Okay, very interesting. So the Gemara says, now obviously, before you even go on, right, burning it and burying it is obviously going to mean what? That it's aser ba'ana. So clearly, again, what Rav Chisda is holding is that the wages earned from working with stam yenam is going to be the same level of prohibition as wages working with yayin nesach. Now the Gemara is going to ask, by the way, v'lei malei bidirinu. So again, I got it. So again, we've answered, at least for now, we've answered our core question, which is the wages from stam yenam are treated with the same level of severity as wages from yayin nesach. But now we're asking Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda tells Ruvain, you have to burn it and bury it. Why? Why, the Gemara says, V'lei malei bidirinu. Just tell him to go ahead and scatter it. In other words, Ruvain, you can't get any benefits from the wheat. Go scatter it. Why do you have to burn it and bury it? So the Gemara says, Asu b'hu lidei takala. Here's the problem, that if you scatter it, what could happen? Someone else could find it and utilize it. And again, these proceeds are usher. They're vested with like Avoda Zara identity. And therefore, it's not enough just to scatter it, because if another Jew picks it up and uses it, it's still prohibited. That's still problematic. So therefore, he told him to burn it at the bury. So the Gemara says, V'liklinu v'libdirnu. So burn it and scatter it. Why do you have to bury it? Right? V'liklinu means burn it. V'libdirnu and scatter it. Why do you have to bury it? Dilma mezabli buhu. Oh, because maybe someone will use it as fertilizer, right? In other words, if you have the burnt wheat, so ultimately, again, that can still be used for fertilizer. Therefore, there's still a concern of usage. So burn it, so no one gets any benefit from the scattered wheat, and bury it this way no one could use the ash as fertilizer. The Gemara says, Vilik berinu beina, so just bury it. So just take the wheat and just bury it. Why do you have to burn it first and then bury it? Just bury it. To which the Gemara says, Milo Tanan. This is actually very interesting. Milo Tanan, did we not learn? Embarrassed to say, the Gemara says, this is in Gemara Masechah Sanhedrin. I don't know. I have one of those Daf Yomi moments where the Gemara tells you learned this before, but somehow I just can't recall. It's Chatani Masker. Very, very, very humbling experience. Okay, the Gemara says, Milo Tanan, didn't we learn? Achad Evan Sheniskalba. This is very interesting. If Beis Din executed someone, so the stone that they used to execute the individual, or if the person was hanged, so ultimately again the tree that they hanged him from, or the sword that they used for decapitation, or the cloth that they put around the person's neck for strangulation. So we'll say again, in all these cases, these were the utensils, the items used to actually carry out the death sentence. What's the halacha? Kulam nikbarin imo. They're all buried together with the person who was killed. Again, the idea about say is you're not supposed to get hana. You're not supposed to get any benefit from these items. So we bury them together with the person who was executed. But if you notice over here, it's not the pshat that like you have to burn the tree before you bury it, right? Or melt down the sword before you bury it, right? Or chisel down the stone before you bury it. You just bury it as is. So same thing by the wheat. Why not just bury the wheat whole? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Very interesting Rashi. Rashi says, "Kula nikbar nimo, tichsiv lo sanlin nasa ala eitz ki kavar tikbarenu." Is actually interesting. The pasuk says when it talks about hanging someone, right? After you execute someone, you hang the body on the tree. So the Gemara says, "Lo sanlin nasa ala eitz." You can't leave the body hanging on the tree. Ki kabar tikbarenu. You have to bury it. Now it's interesting. The Gemara understands over ki kabar tikbarenu doesn't just go on the body, it goes on the tree also. Fascinating. Af ha'etz b'mashma. V'achin perak nigmar adin. Eitz shomeani bein talosh bein mechubar. Tamlomer ki kavartik barenu. Mishein mechos el kvura. Yazesh mechos kvura k'talisha. Alma eitz gufay v'surei hana. V'kavli b'nav v'loch hashem takala. So just by the way, it's just fascinating idea over here that the utensil that is used, the object used to carry out the execution is buried along together with the deceased. So what's the pshat? So Rashi and Chumash actually points out, why do we deconstruct the tree that the person was hanged on? Because you don't want people walking by saying, oh, that was the tree that Ruvain was hanged on. In other words, Ruvain did something wrong. Ruvain got his punishment, but there's no need to go ahead and have any more shame heaped upon Ruvain. He did the crime, he suffered the punishment is mechaper, that's it. Which I will say is such just an incredible sensitivity that Ribono Shel Olam brings to Kavod Abrios. You would have thought, we learned Sanhedrin, and even if you don't remember all of it, remember enough to know that if you're getting a death sentence, remember again, we saw the lengths to which Beis Din goes to try to go ahead and prevent someone from being executed. Which means that like if you're getting executed, not only did you do something terrible, but the mamish could not exhaust any possibility to find an out for you. You would have thought a person like that, throw the book at them. Who cares if people are going to talk about them? Who cares if people are going to disparage them? But yet you see, even for the sinner, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is makbid on their kavod. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks out for their dignity. So I was saying, there's so many lessons in this. If the Ribono Shel Olam looks out for the kavod of the sinner, so first of all, I was like, do you see how much the Ribono Shel Olam loves us? Who is the guy who is getting executed? This is clearly someone who did not care about the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even this individual who, again, literally disregarded the very word of God himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I still love you. I still love you. Even the person being executed for this tremendous trespass against the Ribono Shel Olam is still beloved by Hashem. That's how much Hashem loves us. But if we see how much Hashem loves us, and we see how careful how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with our dignity, even the dignity of the sinner, then how much more so we have to go out of our way to love one another, and ultimately to be careful with the covet of the other as well. It's overwhelming. The notion of how much the Ribono Shel Olam loves us. It defies comprehension. And all he asks of us, it's interesting, he doesn't even ask us to love him as much as he loves us, because that type of reciprocity is not really possible. It's the same way, I think, that all of us would agree. A child can never love a parent as much as a parent loves a child. Of course, they love each other. And we understand this only once we have children of our own. The love that a parent feels in that direction, that top-down love, it cannot be reciprocated in the same way. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he doesn't even ask us, to love him as much as he loves us. He doesn't ask. He asks, he asks us to love him to the extent that we're able to love him. Because the love that he showers down upon us is light years from anything that we could ever reciprocate. But what he does ask of us is, okay, I don't ask you to reciprocate my love, right? He doesn't ask us to reciprocate his love to us, right? He does not ask us to reciprocate that love back to him. But he does ask us to be good to each other. That's what he does ask. You don't have to love me. You don't have to even love each other as much as I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, love all of you. But just be good to each other. Be careful with each other's covet. Don't trample on one another. Don't deconstruct one another. Just love each other. Incredible. So therefore, after a person is executed, the halacha is you have to take the very vehicle of execution, the very utensil, and you have to go ahead and bury it. But you see from here, you don't have to burn it first. To which the Gemara says, oh, it's different. Hasam tekakavri bebeidina muchacha milsa daruge bezdininu. It's different. Why is it different? In those cases, remember, so we learned this in Sanhedrin. This I do remember. We learned this in Sanhedrin. Remember, Haruge Bezdin. Those executed by Bezdin were buried in a special cemetery. So because they were buried in a special cemetery, the utensil, the item, the object of execution was also buried with them. Everyone knows. Therefore, that's different. That's different. We're not sure someone's going to dig up the tree or dig up the stone or dig up the sword. They know that it's buried in the Bezdin cemetery. They know that it's off limits. It cannot be used, and therefore there's absolutely no concern. Hacha lo muchacha milsa. Ultimately, again, here, if you were just to bury, right? Again, if Reuven were just to bury the wheat that he received as the wage for transporting the stam yinam, it's not clear. It's not clear. Again, it's not clear exactly what he's doing. Ultimately, again, in halacha l'maisa, someone may not realize that it is prohibited by Hafra and may come to go ahead and halacha l'maisa dig it up and ultimately use it. Incredible. But I'll say we'll just begin the next case and then we'll stop. Let's just start it. Debei Rabbi Yanai Yasvi Peri Shvius Me'aniyim Uparlo B'Shvius. Actually, no, we'll stop over here. I'm sorry, skip the line. Hachala Mucha Milsa Amor Inish Ganav Va'isi Kivra Hacha. So interestingly enough, we'll say, what are we concerned about? Going back to our case, remember, let's go full circle. Reuven was hired by Akum to transport on his boat Stam Yenam. He got paid in wheat. He came to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, you have to burn it and you have to bury it. So again, I understand they can't scatter it. I understand they can't just burn it. But why do I have to do both? Because the concern over here is like this. If you just bury it, what is it going to look like? Amar in Shigana Va'isi Kivracha. People are going to say, oh, interesting, Reuven's burying wheat. Maybe Reuven went ahead and stole the wheat, and he's burying it over here so that it shouldn't be found out. Well, again, a gonev minaganav is potter, right? If he's steal from a thief, right, this potter. So they may come and dig it up and use it for themselves, not realizing that the reason why Reuven went ahead and buried it was because it was precluded and prohibited from benefit. Therefore, coming full circle, halacha l'maisur, Rav Chisda said to Reuven, you got paid in wheat for transporting stam yenim. So first of all, we see that stam yenam is treated the same way as yayin nesech, and just like by yayin nesech, the wages ultimately are asr ba'ana, so too again by stam yenam, the wages are going to be asr ba'ana. And again, in this case where he got paid in wheat, Rav Chisda said, burn it and bury it. This way it ensures that what? no one gets any benefit from it in any way, shape, or form. I'll also stop over here for today. Shkayach, everyone, a tremendous Zechos Tefillah with all of you, and wishing everyone a wonderful day.